Elena Petrova stood at the edge of the garden, looking at the grand house through the iron fence. The Harrington mansion was the biggest building she had ever seen in her life. It was made of white stone, with tall windows that glowed with golden light. Music played somewhere inside, and she could hear people laughing. She had walked 3 miles from her small apartment to get here tonight, and her feet hurt in her old shoes. She worked as a cleaner at the town hospital. Every day, she mopped floors and emptied trash cans. She earned just enough money to pay rent and buy food. But tonight was different. Tonight was the annual Harrington Ball, the most famous party in the whole town. Everyone talked about it for months before and months after. Rich people came from all over the country to attend. Elena had received an invitation 3 weeks ago. She still did not understand why. The envelope had come to her door with her name written in fancy gold letters. Inside, the invitation said she was welcome to attend the ball on October 15th. She had shown it to her neighbor, Mrs. Chun, who could not believe it either. Tonight, Elena wore her best dress. It was dark blue and simple, made of cheap fabric from the market. She had sewn it herself 2 years ago for her sister's wedding. Her brown hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and she wore small earrings that had belonged to her mother. She knew she looked plain compared to the women who would be inside, but she had done her best. She walked up the long driveway toward the front door. Beautiful cars were parked everywhere. Some drivers stood by their expensive vehicles, smoking cigarettes and talking. They looked at Elena as she passed, and she felt their eyes on her back. Her cheeks grew hot, but she kept walking. At the front door, 2 men in black suits stood guard. One of them was very tall with cold eyes. The other was shorter and held a tablet in his hands. A line of guests waited to enter, all of them dressed in beautiful clothes that probably cost more than Elena earned in a year. She joined the line and waited. Her heart beat fast in her chest. The woman ahead of her wore a red gown covered in small diamonds. The man next to her had a watch that looked like it could buy a house. Elena tried to make herself smaller, invisible. When it was finally her turn, she stepped forward and held out her invitation. Her hand shook a little. The tall guard took the paper and looked at it. His eyebrows went up slightly. The shorter guard typed something on his tablet. He frowned and typed again. Then he looked at Elena from head to toe, his eyes stopping at her worn shoes and a small hole near the hem of her dress that she had hoped no one would notice. The tall guard cleared his throat. He leaned toward his partner, and they whispered to each other. Elena could not hear what they said, but she saw them both look at her again. Her stomach felt tight. Finally, the tall guard turned to her. His face was blank, like a wall. He said the invitation was not valid. He said there must have been a mistake. He said she could not enter the ball. Elena felt the blood drain from her face. She asked what he meant. She showed him the invitation again, pointing to her name and the date. Everything was correct. She had checked it 100 times. The guard shook his head. He said the invitation was probably a fake, or maybe someone had played a cruel joke on her. He said the guest list was very strict, and her name was not on it. He told her she needed to leave now because she was holding up the line. Behind her, Elena heard people whispering. She heard a woman giggle. Someone said something about letting just anyone try to enter these days. Her eyes burned with tears she refused to let fall. She tried one more time. She explained that the invitation had come to her home, addressed to her. She had done nothing wrong. She just wanted to attend the party like everyone else. Her voice cracked on the last words. The tall guard stepped closer to her. He was very large, and she had to look up to see his face. He said if she did not leave immediately, he would have to call the police. He said this was private property, and she was not welcome here. Elena felt something break inside her chest. She had been so excited for this night. She had dreamed about it, imagined dancing in that beautiful ballroom, eating fancy food, meeting interesting people. Now all those dreams crashed around her like broken glass. She turned away from the door. The people in line behind her moved aside, not wanting to touch her, as if her bad luck might spread to them. A young woman in a pink dress laughed loudly and said that some people really did not know their place. Elena walked back down the long driveway. Her vision was blurry with tears she could no longer hold back. She stumbled once on the gravel path, and her shoe came loose. She stopped to fix it, kneeling on the ground like a servant. One of the drivers smoking by the cars called out to her. He asked if she was okay. Elena wiped her face quickly and stood up. She said she was fine. Thank you. He looked at her with kind eyes, and she almost started crying all over again. She walked back through the iron gate, leaving the golden light and the music behind her. The night was cold now, and she wrapped her thin arms around herself. She had no coat because she had thought she would be inside all evening. 3 miles. She had to walk 3 miles home. In the dark, she looked down at her feet and started walking. But she had only gone a few steps when a large black car pulled up beside her. The window rolled down, and an old man looked down at her. He had white hair and a wrinkled face, but his eyes were sharp and curious. He asked her what she was doing, walking alone at night. He asked why she looked so sad. His voice was gentle, like a grandfather talking to a child. Elena did not know why, but she told him everything. She told him about the invitation, about the guards, about being turned away at the door. She showed him the invitation, still crumpled in her hand. The old man took the paper and looked at it carefully. Then he smiled, a small smile that made his eyes crinkle at the corners. He said there had been no mistake. He said he had sent the invitation himself. He said his name was Henry Harrington, and this was his party. Elena could not believe what she was hearing. Henry Harrington was the richest man in the state, maybe in the whole country. He owned banks and hotels and factories. His family had built this town 100 years ago. And he was here, in this car, talking to her. Henry opened the car door and invited her to sit with him. He said he would explain everything, but first he wanted to know about her. He wanted to know why he had chosen to invite her to his ball. Elena hesitated. Her mother had always told her not to get into cars with strangers. But something about this old man felt safe, and she was so tired of walking, so tired of being cold and sad. She got into the car. Inside, it was warm and smelled like leather and old books. Henry offered her a blanket from the back seat, and she wrapped it around her shoulders gratefully. The driver, a quiet man with gray hair, started the engine. Henry looked at Elena for a long moment. Then he asked if she remembered a day 3 months ago at the hospital where she worked. He asked if she remembered helping an old man who had collapsed in the hallway. Elena thought about it. 3 months ago. She remembered mopping floors, emptying trash, all the usual things. And then she remembered. There had been an old man in ordinary clothes walking through the hospital. He had suddenly grabbed his chest and fallen to the ground. People had walked past him, probably thinking he was homeless or drunk. But Elena had rushed to help. She had loosened his collar, called for a doctor, and held his hand until help arrived. She had talked to him gently, telling him he would be okay, that someone was coming to help. Henry smiled again. He said that old man was him. He had been visiting the hospital that day, dressed simply so no one would recognize him. He had wanted to see how the common areas were being kept, how the staff treated ordinary people, and when he fell, when his heart gave him trouble, only one person had stopped to help. Only Elena! Elena shook her head slowly. She said she had just done what anyone would do. She said it was nothing special. Henry disagreed. He said he had seen many people walk past him that day. Rich people, well-dressed people, people who should know better. But they had not helped. Only the cleaning woman with the gentle voice and the kind heart. Only her. He said he had found out her name from the hospital records. He had sent her the invitation himself, with special instructions that she should be welcomed as an honored guest. But somehow, those instructions had not reached the guards at the door. Henry's face darkened when he talked about the guards. He said they would be dealt with. He said no one should be treated the way Elena had been treated tonight, especially not at a party in his home. The car began to move, but not in the direction of Elena's apartment. It drove back toward the mansion, through a different gate, around to the back of the great house. Henry explained that he wanted Elena to enter through his private door. He wanted to introduce her to the party himself. Elena protested. She said she could not go to the ball looking like this. Her dress was plain, her hair was coming loose, and there was mascara on her cheeks from crying. She would embarrass herself and embarrass him. Henry reached over and patted her hand. He said the most beautiful thing at his party tonight would not be a dress or a piece of jewelry. It would be a good heart, a kind soul. And Elena had both. The car stopped at a small door set into the stone wall of the mansion. Henry helped Elena out of the car and led her inside. They walked through quiet hallways lit with soft golden light. Elena saw paintings on the walls and vases full of flowers. Everything was beautiful and expensive and perfect. Finally, they reached a small sitting room. Henry asked Elena to wait here for just a moment. He said he had something to take care of, and then he would come back for her. Elena sat down on a soft chair and looked around the room. There was a fireplace with a small fire burning, and a table with a glass of water that someone had set out. She drank the water slowly, trying to calm her nerves. What was happening to her tonight? Just an hour ago, she had been crying in the driveway, sent away like a thief. Now, she was sitting inside the Harrington mansion, waiting for the richest man in the country to come back and escort her to his ball. She closed her eyes and tried to breathe. Whatever happened next, she knew her life would never be the same. The minutes passed slowly. Elena could hear the music from the ballroom, distant but clear. She could hear people laughing and talking. The sounds reminded her that she was still an outsider here, a cleaning woman in a cheap dress. But then she remembered what Henry had said about kindness, about a good heart. Maybe those things mattered more than money and fancy clothes. Maybe, just maybe, she had something to offer that the rich people in the ballroom did not. She straightened her shoulders and lifted her chin. Whatever happened next, she would face it with dignity. She was Elena Petrova, and she was not ashamed of who she was. The door opened, and Henry Harrington walked back in with a wide smile on his old face. He said everything was ready. He said the ball was about to get very interesting. He held out his arm to Elena, like a gentleman escorting a lady. Elena stood up, smoothed her simple blue dress, and took his arm. Together, they walked toward the ballroom. The ballroom of the Harrington mansion was larger than any room Elena had ever seen. Crystal chandeliers hung from the high ceiling, scattering light like diamonds across the walls. Hundreds of people filled the space, all of them dressed in clothes that sparkled and shone. Women wore gowns of silk and satin, men wore suits that fit perfectly, and everyone dripped with gold and jewels. When Elena and Henry appeared at the top of the grand staircase, the music stopped. Every face turned to look at them. The room fell completely silent. Elena felt her knees go weak. She wanted to run away, to hide somewhere dark where no one could see her. But Henry's arm was firm under her hand, and he patted her fingers gently. A man in a white jacket stood near the bottom of the stairs. He cleared his throat and announced in a loud voice that Mr. Henry Harrington wished to present a very special guest to the assembly. He said this guest was someone who had shown great kindness and courage, and she deserved to be honored tonight. Henry led Elena down the stairs slowly. With each step, she felt the eyes of the crowd on her. She heard whispers spreading like fire through dry grass. She knew they were talking about her dress, her hair, her worn shoes. She could almost hear their thoughts, their judgment, their scorn. But Henry kept walking, and she walked with him. At the bottom of the stairs, he stopped and turned to face the crowd. He spoke in a clear, strong voice that filled the entire ballroom. He told them about the day at the hospital 3 months ago. He told them how he had collapsed on the floor, dressed in ordinary clothes, looking like nobody important. He told them how person after person had walked past him without stopping, without helping, without even looking at him. And then he pointed to Elena. He said this woman, this simple cleaning woman, had been the only one to help him. She had held his hand and talked to him gently and called for a doctor. She had saved his life that day, and she had not even known who he was. The crowd was completely silent now. Some people looked ashamed. Others looked confused. A few looked angry, as if they did not like being told that a cleaning woman was better than them. Henry continued speaking. He said Elena was his honored guest tonight, and anyone who disrespected her would be disrespecting him personally. He said he hoped everyone would remember what true worth looked like. It was not in the clothes people wore, or the cars they drove, or the money in their bank accounts. It was in how they treated others, especially those who could do nothing for them in return. When he finished speaking, there was a long pause. Then one person started clapping. Then another. Soon the whole room was applauding, though Elena was not sure if they were clapping for her or for Henry, or just because they felt they had to. Henry led Elena to the center of the ballroom. The orchestra started playing again, a slow waltz, and he asked her to dance. Elena had not danced in years, not since her sister's wedding. But Henry was patient and gentle, leading her through the steps, and soon she found the rhythm. As they danced, Elena looked around the room. People were watching them, but some had started to dance. The party was coming back to life after the shock of Henry's announcement. When the dance ended, Henry excused himself to greet some other guests. He told Elena to enjoy herself, to eat and drink and talk to anyone she liked. He said this was her night too, and she should make the most of it. Elena stood alone at the edge of the dance floor, feeling lost. She did not know anyone here, and she was afraid to talk to these rich, elegant strangers. What would she say to them? What could they possibly have in common? A young woman approached her. She was beautiful, with dark hair and bright green eyes, wearing a dress that looked like it was made of liquid silver. She introduced herself as Charlotte Harrington, Henry's granddaughter. Charlotte said she had heard what Elena did for her grandfather. She said her family owed Elena a debt they could never repay. She said Henry had been very sick that day at the hospital, and if Elena had not helped him, he might have died right there on the floor. Elena did not know what to say. She tried to explain that she had just done what seemed right, that anyone would have done the same thing, but Charlotte shook her head sadly. Charlotte said, "Elena would be surprised how many people would not have helped." She said most people were too busy or too selfish or too afraid to get involved. She said Elena was special, whether she knew it or not. They talked for a while, Charlotte asking Elena about her life and her work. Elena felt shy at first, but Charlotte was easy to talk to. She seemed genuinely interested in hearing about the hospital, about mopping floors and cleaning bathrooms, about the patients Elena sometimes helped. Soon, other people started coming over to meet Elena. Some of them were curious, some were polite, and a few were clearly just trying to impress Henry by being nice to his special guest. But Elena talked to all of them with the same simple honesty. She met a banker who had made millions in the stock market. She met a famous actress who had been in dozens of movies. She met a politician who was running for governor. They all seemed interested in her story, in how a cleaning woman had come to be the guest of honor at the Harrington Ball. But not everyone was welcoming. Elena noticed a group of women standing in a corner, watching her with cold eyes. One of them was the woman in the pink dress who had laughed at her outside. They whispered to each other and pointed at Elena's plain blue dress. The woman in pink eventually walked over to Elena. Her name was Victoria Sterling, and she came from one of the oldest, richest families in the state. She smiled at Elena, but the smile did not reach her eyes. Victoria said it was very nice that Henry had brought his little charity case to the ball. She said it was good for rich people to remember the less fortunate sometimes. She said Elena must feel very lucky to be here among her betters. Elena felt her face flush with anger. She wanted to say something sharp and cutting to put this rude woman in her place. But she remembered her mother's advice. When people are unkind, the best response is to stay calm and dignified. So Elena simply smiled and said she was grateful for the invitation. She said she was enjoying the party very much. She said Victoria's dress was very beautiful. Victoria seemed disappointed that she had not made Elena angry. She made a sound of disgust and walked away, her silver heels clicking on the marble floor. Charlotte had seen the whole exchange. She came over and squeezed Elena's arm. She said Victoria was always like that, always trying to make other people feel small. She said Elena had handled it perfectly. The evening continued. Elena ate food she had never tasted before. Delicate little dishes served on silver plates. She drank champagne that tickled her nose and made her feel light and happy. She even danced a few more times, once with Charlotte's brother James and once with a kind old man who said he was a retired professor. But the most surprising moment came near midnight. Henry found Elena again and asked her to come with him. He led her to a small stage at the end of the ballroom, where a microphone stood waiting. Henry climbed onto the stage and asked for everyone's attention. The room quieted down, and all eyes turned to him. He said he had one more announcement to make before the night was over. He said he had been thinking about his life, about what mattered and what did not. He said meeting Elena had reminded him of something important, something he had forgotten in his years of making money and running businesses. He said kindness was the most valuable thing in the world. It could not be bought or sold. It could not be measured in dollars and cents, but it was worth more than all the gold and all the banks everywhere. Then Henry said he wanted to do something to help Elena, to repay the kindness she had shown him. He said he was setting up a scholarship fund in her name, the Elena Petrova Kindness Scholarship. Every year, it would give money to young people who showed exceptional kindness in their communities. Elena's mouth fell open in shock. A scholarship fund. In her name! She could not believe what she was hearing, but Henry was not finished. He said he also wanted to offer Elena a job at his family's charitable foundation. He said they needed people with good hearts and strong values. People who understood what it meant to help others without expecting anything in return. He asked Elena if she would consider joining them. Elena stood frozen at the edge of the stage. Everyone was looking at her, waiting for her answer. She thought about her life, about the small apartment and the hard work and the endless mopping of floors. She thought about how much she earned and how little she had. But then she thought about the people at the hospital. She thought about the patients who smiled when they saw her, the nurses who depended on her to keep things clean, the doctors who thanked her for her hard work. She thought about how important her job was, even if no one else could see it. She climbed onto the stage and stood next to Henry. She spoke into the microphone with a shaky voice, but her words were clear. She thanked Henry for his kindness and his generosity. She said she was honored by the scholarship fund and touched by the job offer, but she said she could not accept the position at the foundation. The crowd gasped. Even Henry looked surprised. He asked her, "Why?" Elena explained that she loved her work at the hospital. She said the patients needed her, even if they did not know it. She said she was proud to be a cleaning woman, proud to keep things safe and sanitary for people who were sick and scared. She said she did not need a fancy title or a big salary to feel good about herself, but she said she would gladly help with the scholarship fund in any way she could. She said she believed in kindness too, and she wanted to see it spread in the world. When she finished speaking, there was a moment of silence. Then someone started clapping again. This time, the applause was louder and longer than before. People were smiling and nodding, and Elena saw tears in some eyes. Henry hugged her tightly. He said she was exactly the kind of person he had hoped she would be. He said he respected her decision, and he was proud to call her his friend. The party continued until the early hours of the morning. Elena danced and talked and laughed more than she had in years. She met people who asked for her phone number, who said they wanted to stay in touch, who said they had learned something from her tonight. When it was finally time to leave, Charlotte offered to drive Elena home. They got into Charlotte's car, a sleek sports vehicle that probably cost more than Elena would earn in her entire life. As they drove through the dark streets, Charlotte asked Elena how she felt. Elena thought about the question carefully. She said she felt grateful. Grateful for the strange twist of fate that had brought her here tonight. Grateful for Henry's kindness and Charlotte's friendship. Grateful for the chance to show these rich, elegant people that worth was not measured in money. But she also said she felt tired. Tired of pretending to belong in a world that was not hers. Tired of being stared at and whispered about. Tired of having to prove herself over and over again? Charlotte nodded. She said she understood. She said even for her, being part of this wealthy world was exhausting sometimes. Everyone was always watching, always judging, always keeping score. They pulled up outside Elena's apartment building. It was a small, old building with peeling paint and a broken streetlight out front. Charlotte looked at it and then looked at Elena. She said Elena was welcome to visit the mansion anytime. She said Henry would love to see her again, and so would she. She said they could go out for coffee sometime, just the two of them, like regular friends. Elena smiled and thanked her. She got out of the car and walked toward her front door. Before she went inside, she turned and waved at Charlotte. Then she climbed the stairs to her small apartment, took off her simple blue dress, and fell into bed. She was asleep within minutes, dreaming of crystal chandeliers and kind old men, in a world where kindness was worth more than gold. The next morning, Elena woke up thinking it had all been a dream. But then she saw her blue dress hanging on the back of the door, and she knew it had really happened. She had been to the Harrington Ball. She had met Henry Harrington. She had become the guest of honor at the most famous party in town. She got up slowly, her feet still sore from all the dancing, and made herself a cup of tea. As she sat at her small kitchen table, she thought about what Henry had said. About kindness. About worth. About helping others without expecting anything in return. She had always tried to live that way. Her mother had taught her that being good to people was the most important thing in life. Not money, not success, not fame, just simple, everyday kindness. But last night had shown her something else too. It had shown her that the world was full of people who did not think that way. People like Victoria Sterling, who looked down on anyone who was not rich and powerful. People who walked past an old man lying on the floor because they did not want to get involved. Elena finished her tea and got ready for work. She put on her usual clothes, her comfortable shoes, her name tag that said cleaning staff. She looked at herself in the mirror and saw the same person she had always been. But something had changed inside her. She felt stronger now, more confident. She had stood in a room full of the richest people in the country and held her head high. She had refused a job offer that most people would have grabbed without thinking. She had stayed true to herself. At the hospital, her coworkers noticed something different about her. They asked if she had done something to her hair, if she was wearing new clothes, if she had gotten good news. Elena just smiled and said she had gone to a party last night. Nobody believed her when she told them which party. They laughed and said she must be joking. The Harrington Ball? The one that was all over the news this morning? Impossible! But then, one of the nurses pulled up a news article on her phone. There's a picture of Henry Harrington on the stage, and next to him stood a woman in a simple blue dress. The caption said the woman was Elena Petrova, a hospital cleaning worker who had saved Harrington's life 3 months ago. Elena's co-workers stared at the picture, then stared at Elena, then stared at the picture again. They could not believe it. Elena Petrova, their quiet colleague, who never talked about herself, who always did her job without complaining, who brought cookies for everyone on holidays. She was famous. For the rest of the day, people kept coming by to ask Elena about the ball. Doctors who had never spoken to her before wanted to hear the story. Patients waved her into their rooms to talk. Even the hospital director came down to congratulate her personally. Elena answered their questions politely, but she did not enjoy the attention. She just wanted to do her job, to mop the floors and empty the trash and help people feel better. Fame was not something she had ever wanted. Over the next few weeks, things slowly went back to normal. The news moved on to other stories, and people stopped asking Elena about the ball. She was grateful for the peace and quiet, but she did not forget what had happened. Every few days, she received a letter from Henry Harrington. He wrote about his health, which was improving. He wrote about the scholarship fund, which was growing every day as more donors contributed. He wrote about how much he had enjoyed meeting her and how much he hoped to see her again. Elena wrote back every time. She told him about her work, about the patients she met, about the small kindnesses she saw every day in the hospital. She told him she was thinking about volunteering on her days off, maybe at a shelter or a food bank. She told him his words had inspired her to do more, to give more, to be more. One day, about 2 months after the ball, Elena received a different kind of letter. It was from a law firm she had never heard of, and it was addressed to her with great formality. She opened it with trembling hands, afraid of what it might say. Was someone suing her? Had she done something wrong? But the letter was not bad news at all. It said that Henry Harrington had added her to his will. It said that when he died, she would receive a portion of his estate. Not a huge fortune, but enough to change her life forever. Elena sat down heavily in her chair. She read the letter again, then a third time. She could not believe what she was seeing. She immediately wrote to Henry and asked him to change the will. She said she did not want his money. She said she had not helped him to get anything in return. She said it would not feel right to profit from a simple act of kindness. Henry wrote back within days. He said he understood her feelings, but he asked her to think about it differently. He said the money was not payment for what she had done. It was a gift, freely given, because he wanted to help her, just as she had helped him. He said she could refuse the inheritance if she really wanted to, but he asked her to consider accepting it and using it to help others. She could donate it to charity, or fund more scholarships, or support the hospital where she worked. The money could do so much good in the hands of someone like her. Elena thought about it for a long time. She talked to her neighbor, Mrs. Chun, who had become like a mother to her over the years. She talked to Charlotte, who had kept her promise and become a real friend. She even talked to the hospital chaplain, a kind woman who always had wise advice. In the end, she decided to accept the inheritance, but with conditions of her own. She wrote to Henry and told him that when the time came, she would put all the money into the Elena Petrova Kindness Foundation. The foundation would give grants to people who showed exceptional kindness in their communities, ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Henry wrote back to say he thought that was a wonderful idea. He said she had made him very proud and very happy. The months passed. Elena continued working at the hospital, mopping floors and emptying trash and helping wherever she could. But now, she also spent time on the foundation, which was already receiving donations from people all over the country who had heard about her story. She reviewed applications from amazing people. A teenager who had started a food pantry in his high school. A grandmother who had fostered more than 50 children over 40 years. A doctor who volunteered at free clinics on her weekends. All of them were doing incredible things, and Elena felt honored to help them continue their work. The foundation gave out its first grants on the one-year anniversary of the Harrington Ball. Elena attended a small ceremony at the hospital, where she handed checks to the recipients and thanked them for their service to others. Standing at the podium, looking out at the crowd of smiling faces, Elena thought about how much had changed in a year. She was still the same person she had always been. She still lived in the same small apartment, still wore the same comfortable shoes, still worked the same job she had worked for years, but she had also become something more. She had become a symbol of kindness, a reminder that ordinary people could do extraordinary things. She had proved that worth was not measured in money or status or power. And she had found something she never expected to find. She had found a family. Charlotte called her every week. Henry wrote letters that made her laugh and cry. The people at the foundation had become dear friends. She was no longer alone in the world. At the end of the ceremony, Elena gave a short speech. She talked about her mother, who had taught her to be kind. She talked about Henry, who had given her a chance to shine. She talked about all the people in the room, who were making the world a better place, one small act at a time. And she talked about the night she had been turned away from the Harrington Ball. She said that night had been one of the worst of her life. She had felt worthless, invisible, ashamed of who she was. But it had also been one of the best nights of her life, because it had led her to Henry and to Charlotte and to all of this. It had shown her that sometimes the worst moments could become the best moments if you just kept going. She ended her speech with a simple message. "Be kind," she said. "Be kind to everyone you meet, because you never know what they are going through. Be kind to strangers, and friends, and family, and yourself. Be kind, even when it is hard, even when it seems pointless, even when no one is watching, because kindness matters. It matters more than money, or fame, or power. It matters more than anything else in the world." The crowd applauded. Elena stepped down from the podium and was immediately surrounded by people who wanted to hug her, to thank her, to tell her how much she had inspired them. And somewhere in the back of the room, an old man with white hair and crinkled eyes watched with a proud smile on his face. Henry Harrington had known from the moment he met Elena that she was special, and now the whole world knew it too. It had not pitted about the simple woman who had been denied access to a mansion ball, had shocked the elite and changed lives forever. Not with money or power or connections, just with the simple, powerful act of being kind. That was her gift to the world, and it was worth more than all the gold and all the mansions everywhere. 3 years had passed since that fateful night at the Harrington Ball. Elena still worked at the hospital, though her role had changed somewhat. She had been promoted to supervisor of the cleaning staff, a position she had initially refused but eventually accepted when she realized she could help train younger workers and improve conditions for everyone. Her small apartment now had a few more comforts. A new couch from a second-hand store. Fresh curtains her neighbor, Mrs. Chun, had helped her sew. A bookshelf filled with letters from Henry and photographs from foundation events. It was still modest, still simple, but it was home. One morning in early spring, Elena received a phone call that changed everything. It was Charlotte, and her voice was thick with tears. Henry had passed away peacefully in his sleep the night before. He was 93 years old. Elena sat down slowly, the phone pressed against her ear. She listened as Charlotte talked about the funeral arrangements, about the family gathering that would happen that evening, about how Henry had asked specifically that Elena be there. For a long moment, Elena could not speak. Henry had become such an important part of her life. His letters had guided her through difficult times. His wisdom had helped her make hard decisions. His friendship had shown her that connections could cross all boundaries of class and wealth and age. She took the day off work and went to the Harrington mansion. The great house looked different now. Quieter and sadder somehow. Black ribbons hung from the gates, and the gardens seemed to droop with grief. Charlotte met her at the door and hugged her tightly. They stood there for a long time. Two women who had found an unlikely friendship, holding each other and crying. Inside, the family had gathered in a large sitting room. Elena recognized some faces from the ball 3 years ago. James, Charlotte's brother, who had danced with her that night. Henry's daughter, Margaret, a serious woman with kind eyes. Various cousins and nieces and nephews, all dressed in black. They welcomed Elena warmly. They told her how much Henry had talked about her, how proud he had been of the foundation, how often he had said that meeting her was one of the best things that ever happened to him. The funeral was held 2 days later. It was a grand affair, with hundreds of people filling the largest church in town. Politicians and business leaders and celebrities came to pay their respects. News cameras lined the street outside, but Elena barely noticed any of it. She sat with Charlotte and the family, remembering the old man who had stopped his car on a dark night to help a crying woman. Remembering his gentle voice, his crinkled eyes, his belief in the power of kindness. The minister spoke about Henry's life, his accomplishments, his generosity. He talked about the hospitals and schools and libraries that bore the Harrington name. He talked about the thousands of people who had benefited from Henry's charity over the years. And then, Charlotte stood up to speak. She talked about her grandfather as a person, not just as a wealthy man. She talked about his love of gardening, his terrible jokes, his habit of sneaking cookies before dinner. She made people laugh and cry at the same time. At the end of her speech, Charlotte turned and looked directly at Elena. She said her grandfather had one final wish that he had asked her to share. He wanted Elena to speak at his funeral. He wanted her to tell the story of how they met, of what she had taught him, of why kindness mattered. Elena's heart nearly stopped. Speaking at the funeral of Henry Harrington, in front of all these important people, she could not do it. She was just a cleaning woman from a small apartment. What could she possibly say? But Charlotte's eyes were pleading, and Elena remembered all the times Henry had believed in her when she did not believe in herself. She stood up slowly and walked to the front of the church. The microphone seemed very high, the crowd seemed very large, and her voice seemed very small. But she thought of Henry, and she began to speak. She told the story of the day at the hospital. She told it simply and honestly, without trying to make herself seem heroic. She described how she had seen an old man fall and had rushed to help him, how she had held his hand and talked to him until the doctors came, how she had never expected to see him again. She told the story of the night at the ball, how she had been turned away at the door, humiliated and heartbroken. How Henry had found her walking alone in the dark and had invited her into his car. How he had told her the truth and had taken her into the party as his guest of honor. And she told the story of the years since then. How Henry had become her friend and mentor. How he had helped her start the foundation. How he had shown her that one person, no matter how ordinary, could make a difference in the world. When she finished speaking, the church was completely silent. Then, slowly, people began to stand. They stood one by one, then in groups, then all together. A standing ovation at a funeral was unusual, but it felt right somehow. Elena walked back to her seat with tears streaming down her face. Charlotte grabbed her hand and held it tight. The service continued, but Elena barely heard the rest. She was thinking about Henry, about all he had done for her, about how much she would miss him. After the funeral, there was a reception at the mansion. Elena moved through the crowd in a daze, accepting condolences and kind words from people she did not know. Everyone wanted to talk to her, to tell her how beautiful her speech had been, to say they had heard so much about her from Henry. Finally, the family lawyer approached her. He was a thin man with glasses and a serious face. He asked if Elena could come to his office the next day for the reading of the will. Elena nodded, though she already knew what the will would say. Henry had told her years ago about the inheritance, and she had already decided what to do with it. The money would go to the foundation, every penny of it. But when she arrived at the lawyer's office the next day, she discovered that Henry had changed his plans. The lawyer read through the document carefully. Henry had left money to his children and grandchildren. Of course, he had left donations to his favorite charities. He had made provisions for his staff, many of whom had worked for him for decades. And then the lawyer came to the section about Elena. Henry had left her the same amount he had mentioned years ago, enough to change her life if she wanted to. But there was something else too. The lawyer explained that Henry had purchased Elena's apartment building 6 months before his death. He had bought it quietly, through a company that could not be traced back to him, and he had left it to Elena in his will. Elena's mouth fell open! The building had 12 apartments. It housed families who struggled to pay rent, elderly people on fixed incomes, young workers just starting out. Elena knew all of them by name. The lawyer continued. Henry's instructions were clear. Elena was to keep the building and maintain it as affordable housing. She could never sell it or raise the rents beyond what her neighbors could pay. The building was to remain a home for ordinary people. People like Elena herself. There was more. Henry had also set up a trust fund to cover maintenance and repairs for the building for the next 50 years. Elena would never have to worry about finding money to fix a broken pipe or replace a roof. Everything had been taken care of. Elena sat in the lawyer's office for a long time after the reading was finished. She could not believe what Henry had done. He had given her not just money, but security. Not just a gift, but a responsibility. Not just an inheritance, but a mission. She walked home slowly that day, looking at her building with new eyes. The peeling paint would be fixed soon. The broken street lights would be replaced. The old elevator that never worked properly would finally be repaired. But the people inside would stay the same. Mrs. Chun would still live next door with her cats and her sewing machine. The young couple on the third floor would still argue about whose turn it was to cook dinner. The old man on the first floor would still sit on his balcony every evening, watching the sun go down. Elena let herself into her apartment and sat down on her new second-hand couch. She looked around at her modest home, her simple life, everything she had worked so hard to build. And she realized that Henry had given her the greatest gift of all. He had given her the chance to keep being exactly who she was. She was Alena Petrova, cleaning supervisor at the hospital. She was the founder of the Kindness Foundation. She was the owner of an apartment building that would never be sold to developers. Never be turned into luxury condos. Never be taken away from the people who called it home. She was still a simple woman. But she had learned that simple did not mean small, and ordinary did not mean unimportant. The next few months were busy. Elena worked with lawyers and accountants to set up the building trust properly. She met with her tenants to explain what had happened and to assure them that nothing would change. She continued her work at the hospital and her work with the foundation. Charlotte became even closer to her during this time. They met for coffee every week, talking about their lives and their losses and their hopes for the future. Charlotte was going through her own grief, missing her grandfather terribly, but she found comfort in her friendship with Elena. One day, about 6 months after Henry's death, Charlotte arrived at their usual coffee shop with exciting news. She had decided to leave her job at a prestigious law firm and join the Kindness Foundation full-time. She wanted to honor her grandfather's memory by continuing his work. Elena was overjoyed. Charlotte brought skills and connections that the foundation desperately needed. Together, they could do so much more than Elena could do alone. They spent the afternoon making plans. They would expand the scholarship program. They would start a grants program for community projects. They would create an annual award for outstanding acts of kindness. The possibilities seemed endless. By the time they left the coffee shop, the sun was setting and the streets were filled with golden light. Elena looked at Charlotte and felt a surge of gratitude for everything that had happened since that night at the ball. She had been denied access to a mansion ball, humiliated by guards who thought she did not belong. She had cried in a driveway, convinced that she was worthless and invisible. But then a kind old man had stopped to help her, and everything had changed. Now she had a foundation that helped thousands of people every year. She had a building that would provide affordable housing for generations to come. She had friends who loved her and colleagues who respected her. She had a purpose and a mission and a reason to get up every morning. And she had learned the most important lesson of all. The one Henry had tried to teach her from the very beginning. Kindness was not about being rich or powerful or famous. It was not about grand gestures or expensive gifts. It was about seeing people, really seeing them, and treating them with dignity and respect. It was about stopping to help an old man who had fallen on the floor. It was about taking in a crying woman from the cold. It was about giving someone a chance when everyone else had turned them away. Elena walked home through the golden evening light, her heart full of love and gratitude. She thought about all the people who had helped her along the way. Her mother, who had taught her to be kind. Mrs. Chun, who had become like family. Charlotte, who had become her dearest friend. And Henry, always Henry, who had believed in her when she could not believe in herself. She let herself into her building and climbed the stairs to her apartment. Mrs. Chun waved from her doorway, and Elena stopped to chat for a few minutes. The old man on the first floor called out a greeting, and Elena promised to visit him later for tea. Finally, she reached her own door. She went inside, put on her comfortable clothes, and made herself a cup of tea. She sat by the window and watched the last light fade from the sky. Tomorrow, she would go back to work at the hospital. She would mop floors and supervise her staff and smile at the patients who were having hard days. She would be the same Elena she had always been, doing the same work she had always done. But she would carry Henry's memory with her, and Charlotte's friendship, and the knowledge that she was making a difference in the world. Not through money or power, but through kindness, simple, everyday kindness. That was her gift. That was her legacy. That was her story. And it was far from over. Elena Petrova, the simple woman who had shocked the elite, continued to live her quiet life and change the world, one small act of kindness at a time. And somewhere, she knew Henry Harrington was watching and smiling, proud of the woman she had become and the woman she had always been.